I always say I'm proof that if you're going through hell, never stop.
Hmm.
Just keep walking, keep moving. Because if you stop, you're in hell. You know what I'm
Totally.
saying? You're right
Yeah.
where you're at. And yeah, there may be times where you have to sit down and whatever, but if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, things don't always stay bad. Things don't always stay good either. Things, but you can be moving. At least I want to be discomforted and uncomfortable in the life that I want.
Right.
I
Yeah.
there's because if you're uncomfortable or unhappy in the life you don't want, it even makes that more uncomfortable and more difficult. Um, there's
Yeah.
something about working towards what you want to work for. I think that's why working out is such a good analogy
Mhm.
because you're working out. It's painful, but it's a good kind of pain.
Mhm.
It's a good kind of discomfort. It's a good
Yeah.
thing, you
It's
know.
Welcome to the Do You Feel Heard podcast, a production of Helping the Herd. Helping the Herd is committed to empowering individuals to liberate themselves from the patterns that keep them from creating their ideal life. If you like this podcast, visit helpingtheherd.com to find resources and personalized coaching to empower you to be your best self.
all right.
Hey everybody, we're back. Sorry, a little bit of technical difficulties, but we got Brad back, and we just got done talking about all the different groups that you offer, all the different ways that you are supporting people through invisible roadblocks. And I had questions, so I'm just going to jump right into them real quick. Derek, if
Good.
that's all right with you, I'll just start with one of them, and then you can jump in. I just
Absolutely.
wanted to know about these groups specifically. Are they virtual? Are you meeting with people online? You said you're all over the place. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
multinational. So, are you? Is it all virtual? Is it weekly? What's the kind of structure of the groups? If people were curious about the groups, what could they expect?
Sure. Um, we are both virtual and in person. So it depends. They can research where our groups are on our Facebook or on our website, freshhope.us. And then they can look up and find out. If they don't see something, they can always email us info at freshhope.us. And then we have them in Spanish, English, I think Japanese, Chinese.
Hmm.
There's So it just depends where people live as to whether if there's an in-person group, we really encourage people to attend the in-person groups.
Hmm.
And then if there's a virtual group, of course, they can attend and wherever, for instance. And Fresh Hope is just starting to have affiliates. So now there's like Fresh Hope Australia,
Mm.
and there's Fresh Hope or Latin speaking countries. There's one in Europe and place soon to be Africa. But so yeah, it's pretty uh, accessible to people. It just depends on time zones with
Sure.
the,
Hmm.
virtual meetings. Some people are getting up in the middle of the night and attending a meeting, I think.
That's funny. We know what that's like. One of our coaches is in Amsterdam, and so that's been fun. I can imagine the Australian and Japanese time zone calculations keep you busy. But how
Oh, yeah.
wonderful! How wonderful that that reach is so large, and I feel like the also, I'm sure there's similar problems in every country and also very different ones and different societal issues, cultural issues. So I feel like having that broader perspective is probably really healing and maybe someone from some one country sees something in a totally different light and really helps someone see it that way and vice versa. I love
Yeah. Well, and, to be honest, for your listeners, sometimes we think that what we go through in life, let's say something bad happens, and we think it's just so terrible. And yet it becomes the stepping stone
mm,
into what you can do for the future. That, like when I collapsed and I had pastored a church from about 800 to 3,000 in worship, and it was the largest one in the denomination, et cetera, et cetera. And when I collapsed and it was so public, I was certain the best of my life was already
Mm.
gone. I was pretty sure the best was behind me. And I felt a lot like broken merchandise, if you will. And it ended up being that very thing that happened and what I was diagnosed with becomes the thing that, like last year, we had over 600 and some thousand hope filled touches with people. And so, you just go, okay, I get it. What's As a Christian, I happen to believe Romans 8:28 says that God can take and work all things out together for your good, and He did.
Hmm.
And sometimes our woundedness or our brokenness in life
Mm.
becomes the very sweet spot for helping other people.
Absolutely.
That's so right.
Yeah,
Yeah, do you
there's.
know?
Oh, go
uh,
ahead.
You might be saying the same thing too, and I know you know. Pastor Brad, do you know the parable of the farmer that finds a horse?
I might know it, but
It's
go for
a, I
it.
think it's a Taoist, like a Chinese parable. It's fantastic. It's just what you're talking about here. It goes something like, a farmer's in a field one day and finds a wild horse, and all the other townspeople, how lucky that you found a horse. Like that's so valuable. He goes, maybe. Then his son is riding the horse and trying to break it and trying to help, and the son gets kicked off the horse and breaks his arm. All the townspeople, how unlucky that you found that horse that broke your son's arm.
Yeah.
Maybe, he says. The military comes by later and is conscripting children and every able-bodied person for a military campaign. Because the son has the broken arm, he's not taken off to war, and many of the townspeople don't come back from that war. So, of course, the neighbors congratulate the farmer on this and say it was good luck that he found the horse. And yet again, the farmer just goes, maybe. I don't know how long it could go on, but it really illustrates that same point. Our misfortunes can sometimes be that stepping stone, that thing that takes us where we are. And it's a very hopeful mindset to have, I think, and a really useful one. But at least the parable really gets to at least the fact that you never know. At least you never know. Because
Hmm.
sometimes the certainty, I think, can be really tough. Whenever you know that the best is behind me, that's when you're in trouble. At least if you're uncertain, that's almost an inherently hopeful position to be in, whether you're optimistic or not about it.
Yeah. Yep, for
And I just
sure.
wanted to share that. What did you have, Ian?
Oh, I was just going
Yeah.
to share that sometimes in our lives we have very limited perspective. We can only see the present moment. We can remember some cloudy, hazy memories from the past, and we have ideas of what may be in the future. But our perspective is pretty limited. Whereas God, Creator, Source, whatever you'd like to use for that, whatever your belief is, you may not be able to see what they can see. And so you may be on a path and it was the right path, but it isn't the path you're supposed to be on forever. But you may stay on that path because it's comfortable and it and it's familiar. But, and so ultimately you would never change and do these other things if not for these, you know, what may feel like cataclysmic events in your life of,
Oh,
oh my
yeah.
God, like everything I had is gone. But if that didn't happen, you wouldn't do this other thing that you need to be doing. You need to turn in the road, but you're not going to turn unless there's a barrier that, oh, shoot, I have to turn or else.
Hmm.
And so when you view things from that perspective of it's an opportunity, I don't know why this is happening, but it is happening. And so what am I going to do with this, or what can I do with this? Is this actually a positive? Is there a silver lining, right? There's that mindset that people have, but is there a reason that this could be for my benefit? And instead
Yep.
of looking at it as, this isn't what I want, I was attached to this other thing, or I would really prefer it to be something different than it actually is, and you get stuck in not wanting something to be the way that it is, and that will keep you stuck, and it'll definitely keep you in a negative mindset
Hmm.
versus, all right, this is happening. now what? Now what do I do? How can I, where's the opportunity here? Because you may not have understood until later. And then you have that hindsight, was what we're talking about here, is that hindsight of, oh yeah, I'm so glad that terrible thing. I felt like my life had ended. Everything I had was, it felt like it was destroyed. But now I look back and really it was, what a great opportunity it gave me for all these other things. And so again, your mindset, how are you perceiving what's happening to you? And you always have a choice over that. You get to choose how you perceive your experience.
You guys probably know this, but very, 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 very few of us ever grow by simply hearing something. Very few people change by hearing facts and statistics. What causes change and growth in us is pain. Pain is the ultimate thing that causes us to grow. Think about it when you're working out, which I should do more of. But
Me
when
too.
you're working out, you get sore muscles, right?
Sure.
But it leads to better health. It leads to something physical. The same is true emotionally. Um, for instance, when I was I was ready to be done pastoring and moving into just doing Fresh Hope full time, right? Because I had like two full-time jobs for many years. And I didn't do it, and I didn't do it. And the reason I didn't do it was because I didn't know how it would work financially. I just didn't know. And so I didn't want to risk, I didn't want to make the jump. Well, until an all out church war started. And I said, I'm really done ministering to stubborn people. I'm just really done with this. And it was really the pain of the situation caused me to make a move that wouldn't have made had I not had the pain. And I don't think that's just true for Christians, or it's for everybody. It just life, normally we don't get better or move forward until the pain of doing so is less than the pain of staying where we're at.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was gonna share the word pain is a little activating for me. That's the only way that we're motivated. The word discomfort resonates with me, and there's this saying of, there's discomfort in staying in the same place, and there's discomfort in doing something different. Which one do you want? Choose the discomfort that you want in your life, because if you do the same thing forever and you never change anything, that's also going to be very uncomfortable.
Well,
You're
and they say if doing the same thing over and over is nothing more than a grave. I mean, if you want change and you're doing the same thing over and over, that's insane,
Sure.
you know, and you're just going to be in a grave, if you will. It just, you're going to keep getting what you're getting unless you make changes. Might be in your thinking, or might be, yeah. Yeah, I use the word pain because mine was so painful. Um, but yeah, there's discomfort. There's sometimes it's financial discomfort. Sometimes it's emotional discomfort. Sometimes it's relational discomfort. You know, and but I always say I'm proof that if you're going through hell, never stop. Just keep walking, keep moving. Because if you stop, you're in hell. You know what I'm saying? You're right where
Yeah.
you're at. And yeah, there may be times where you have to sit down and whatever, but if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, things don't always stay bad. Things don't always stay good either. Things, but you can be moving. At least I want to be discomforted and uncomfortable in the life that I want.
Right.
I
Yeah.
there's because if you're uncomfortable or unhappy in the life you don't want, it even makes that more uncomfortable and more difficult. Um, there's
Yeah.
something about working towards what you want to work for. I think that's why working out is such a good analogy, because you're working out. It's painful, but it's a good kind of pain. It's a good kind of discomfort. It's a good thing. you
It's
know.
voluntary, right? It's voluntary. I
Right.
really like the word suffering here. You know,
Mm.
discomfort,
Sure.
pain, suffering. I like, and that's one of my favorite things from Christianity. Is for me, Jesus. I've heard him talked about is the symbol for the voluntary taking on of suffering. You know, literally on the cross, taking on all the sins of mankind and taking on enormous suffering and sacrifice voluntarily. For me, that's what comes through the most
Hmm.
with Christianity is this idea, this concept of voluntarily taking on suffering, like when you go to the gym, like when you move toward the uncomfortable thing instead of away from it, and maybe there's some metamorphosis and release and something happens, but at the end of the day, it's just what we're talking about. It's accepting, and then again, I think it's that voluntary part for me. I come back to that agency, that voluntary part of it, because who wants to be when we're involuntarily forced to suffer, if someone were to just make you feel exactly like you felt at the gym after benching 225 pounds, let's say in the middle of the night without you choosing it, you think you were having a heart attack. You think you
Yeah.
were literally
Yeah.
dying. And it would be like horrible, terrifying. But that exact same experience, when you choose it, when you're in the right set and setting, amazing. Or you could be having a lifting high. You could just feel as
Well,
good as you could.
it goes from you believing it's destroying you to empowering you.
That's right. The mindset,
Yeah,
exactly.
and to be empowered for where I'm going, and you have to do that same thing with your brain. You have to do that same thing where you're exercising your thinking, how you think about things, how you look at things, how you frame things. I think you have to do that same kind of thing in order to get out of life what you want or to get to where you want to go in life. Um,
So, so how do you I'd like to shift this to back to the fresh hope and the groups and the hope coaching. How do
sure.
you how do you bring this mindfulness, which is what I'm hearing? How do you bring this mindfulness into practice for your participants,
Clients. Right.
clients? So I mean, yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know
Hmm.
if they're clients or, but the people that are showing up and the
Yeah,
people that are looking
right.
for
Yeah.
help and support. How does
Participants. Yeah,
yeah, participants. How do you translate this mindfulness into hope for them? What kind of
that's
ways do you have for them?
that's a great question. Um, First of all, we deal with we talk about the negative right up front. The fact that there are people that get stuck in ruminating. They literally get stuck thinking the same negative things over and over and over. And in fact, there's research that shows that when that happens, the brain gets stuck in an electrical current, and then it connects all of the negativity in your life. And it actually looks on when they do these tests, it looks like kind of thorny black bushes in the brain,
Hmm.
and you get triggered or you get this or you get that, and right away you're ruminating. And so we teach people how to stop ruminating. And when we do that, we literally tell them, uh, and pardon me, because the only way I know how to talk about it is Scripture says that we are to take captive our thinking and we're to think on certain things as opposed to the negative things. And literally not letting your brain be on automatic pilot is the first thing.
Hmm.
To say, I'm going to be in control of what I think about. And no, I'm not going to think about that anymore. Thinking about that doesn't do any good. I've made the change that I can. I can't do anything more about it. I need to let go of it. And for instance, for me, when I was trying to stop ruminating, I literally wore a rubber band and snapped myself with it
Mm.
because your brain almost needs to be interrupted. It's, when you're really focused, maybe you're reading or studying, and somebody walks into the room and interrupts you, and suddenly you can't go back to what you were doing because you lost your focus. Well, that's what you need to do with ruminating, for
Hmm.
instance. Then what we teach people is not only that, but now how do you fill your brain and your thinking with the things that are going to help you? You
Mm-hmm.
know, that because it doesn't mean that you're not realistic. It doesn't mean that you go, oh, life is good, everything's fine, and, you
Yeah.
know, it's all peachy keen, and I'm going to, you know, no, there's still pain, there's difficulties, but you have to keep it within balance. You have to understand it. Um, and so ultimately, when in regards to Ian, you mentioned how the hope factor. What happens is when people get stuck in ruminating, and there are people who have bents towards, the majority of people are bent towards pessimism. They always are worst case scenario thinkers. And and they've had maybe some things in life that back that up to them, you know, and reinforce that. When you have those two things, many times people find themselves in hopeless situations or situations where they're going to give up. You know, whether it's pressing in on that dream, maybe it's to own a business or to have a certain kind of career or something like that. And hopelessness sets in when you're ruminating, you're thinking nothing's going to work, nothing can work, there's no way forward. And hopelessness, the bottom line in 25 years of clinical research is this simple. Hopelessness is when you don't see a way forward. Hope is when you see a few steps forward. You begin to see a way through the difficulties. And so there are certain questions that are asked that are almost because people, once they get the negative or the things that they need to get out of them that they're discomforted by or feel, you know, that they're ruminating about or whatever, when they get those things out, and we have to express it. That's the other thing. And we men are terrible about this. We think we can do it in a
Mm-hmm.
silo. You know, I'll be fine. I just got to think through this.
That's right. More
We need
rumination.
each other. We need other people so we can kind of pook up on each other and get it out. And then the question that's so important at that point is, do you see a potential next step?
Hmm.
And when people can see that, they have hope.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, my wife and I adopted our oldest child, our son. We only have two kids. Our son is 42. He's probably, you guys might be younger than that. I mean, I'm old. I'm old. But when we were sitting with the social worker and we had him in our arms already, she asked if we'd ever thought about divorce. And the two of us looked at each other and said, divorce? No, never, never, ever, ever, never. And then I said, murder? Yes. But I think sometimes we get
It's honest.
ourselves in such dire circumstances in our thinking, not in what actually transpires,
Yeah.
that we immediately go to the worst case scenario, you know.
Yeah.
And
Stories,
I
right?
see more people than not being held back by a couple of things in life. And I'm sorry you didn't ask this question, but I'm going there. Um, One is unforgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
and two is self limitations,
Hmm.
believing they can't learn this, they can't do that. But unforgiveness really holds people back because it takes a lot of energy to not forgive. And forgiveness is not something I do for the person I'm forgiving, it's for me. So I'm not bogged down by anger and resentment and all of those things. But the second thing is I can't. The thinking I can't do this, I can't do that. You know, blah blah blah. And the third thing is just anger, I think holds people down. That life's not fair, that it's difficult, it's too difficult. Um, I'm sure there's more, but those are the things that I so often see for people. The truth is, life is difficult, and it's not easy, but it can be a lot of fun,
Certainly.
you know. And in being a lot of fun, hey, you got to laugh when it's time to laugh. You got to cry when it's time to cry, and you know, um,
Sure. Yeah,
and
this life would be very boring. And I mean, if everything was easy, there was never any hardship, there was never any difficulty to overcome, it'd be very, very boring. And at the same time, again, all this mindfulness talk, I love that's where we're at. That's definitely Derek and I love being in the mindfulness space. But I mean, there's a lot of suffering in the world, and there's a lot of, dark things, but there's also so much beauty. Like, this is such an incredible place. Like, what an incredible environment to be born into and to be able to experience this life in. Like, there's so much there if you want to see it. But there's also plenty of, negative things to see if you really want to see that too, if you're committed to seeing that either way. And I think, again, that's where we get to. You get to choose your lens, you get to choose your frame. Do you want to look at all the
exactly.
awful things, or do you want to see all the beauty that's here? And I think that'll definitely help steer you in, toward the experience you're looking for.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
Yeah, and accepting that we are hardwired towards certain frames and different things. You were talking about that negativity bias, and evolutionarily makes perfect sense, right? If something almost ended your life once, the only thing you should think about if you're selecting for survival is how to prevent that, and
Or
let's make
avoid.
sure we're primed for it, avoid it all the time
Yeah,
so that we'll see it everywhere. So we're just going to
for sure.
highlight the negatives, and it takes, and that's why I love the term coaching. That's why what we do here is coaching, because there doesn't even have to be anything wrong for you to be able to work toward more ideal, toward living well. Something you say a lot on there, to what's thriving instead of surviving. And that means tuning the systems, accepting that even if things are great, I might have a few areas where I could tune. I might be a little more negative, and I really like that you talked about that as well. Optimism, as opposed to naivete. I don't like when people say naive instead of optimism.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that's really
Where
hard for me.
I'm trying to see if I have on my desk here. I may not have it right here, but there's a book written by a psychologist, and it's pardon me while I'm on a podcast. I'm digging through my pile of stuff
Must be a
here.
good book.
Um, it the book is Learned Optimism, and he takes you through the fact that the vast majority of American depression in America, has to do with pessimism. It doesn't really have to do with chemical imbalance in the brain. It has to do with thinking and that catastrophic. I came from a family of long line of Germans who immediately when something potentially bad's going to happen, you go to the worst and you catastrophize. And but I myself come out in all of his testing, and it's quite complex. That I'm an optimistic person, period. But what he says is that people can learn optimism. You can train your brain to really go towards optimism.
Sure.
And I always see these young guys at the gym taking pictures of themselves in the mirror, doing their flexing and all of that. And I always walk up to them, no matter what color they are, no matter what skin hues they have. I'll walk up and say, I could be your before picture. And then I tell them, I am so sexy with six pack abs that I have to cover it with a keg because otherwise I'm just chased by women. And they laugh. But they are there at the gym to refine their bodies. They want it to work like clockwork, right?
Well, at least
And
they want it to look. They may not want it to work like clockwork. I know a lot of people at the
yeah,
gym that are sculpting that are also consuming all sorts of things that are not helping their
yeah,
body
yeah, yeah,
work optimally.
yeah, that's true. But if you take it that they really are doing it for health reasons and all of that, we need to do the same thing with our brains.
Sure.
We need to do
That's
the
right.
same thing with our thinking. And that really is a key factor for me because no matter the age, we still have to exercise our brains. And and that learned optimism is so important in my thinking because people are more, I think, we live in a broken world. The world isn't perfect. And because of that brokenness, and nobody can really argue about that. So, how do you understand the brokenness, but at the same time exercise your brain to be optimistic?
Sure.
Yeah. Mental fitness, right? I love that you're bringing that up. It gets overlooked a lot. We all have this physical fitness idea. You should go, you should exercise some amount, but so often we can overlook the mental fitness part. And when you're talking about mental health or mental illness, we talk about it in the health part, we talk about illness a lot, but we don't often talk about mental training, mental coaching, mental fitness,
Hmm.
toward the positive or preventative in like any of the ways we talk about the brain. So I love that you're spreading that concept out.
Yeah.
Well, and they've demonstrated too. I mean, you can look at whether it's media, whether it's marketing, whether it's some of the CIA's fun little experiments that they've done in the past. But the human brain is programmable. We know that.
Yes.
We know that the human brain is programmable,
Hmm.
and when you then consider the fact that placebo drugs work. A sugar pill will work just because the person believes that it's working. If you believe that you can reprogram your brain, then you are going to reprogram your brain, right? And again, back to that mindfulness here of perspective. I know that my brain was programmed, whether it was through, I mean, public school system is going to program you to think a certain way and believe certain things and look at the world through a certain lens, similar to all the media that you're consuming. And so, if you know that it has been programmed, then you can take the time and energy to reprogram your brain or deprogram
Hmm.
those harmful programs that are limiting you in a lot of ways and keeping you from creating the life that you want. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing with Fresh Hope, is helping to reprogram people's mindsets to one that gets them thinking about, well, what do I do now that I have this understanding about my circumstances? What can I do with it, rather than,
Hmm.
well, all is lost, I have this thing, and
Yeah,
there's
I'm
nothing
not
to
a
be done now.
victim.
Exactly, victimhood,
I'm
very
not a
good.
victim.
Right.
I have to have an empowered mindset. And Dr. Caroline Leaf, Leaf, wrote a book called "Who Switched Off My Brain," and it in that book she talks about the fact that you can that negative looping that I was talking about with the black.
Hmm.
Okay, within 30 days you can change that where it will not connect and it because the brain easily gets that all hooked together, but you can with taking control of your thinking you can change how that brain reacts. I don't dare leave my brain on automatic pilot. I will fritter a day away. I can if I let my brain be in control, of what it's going to think about. Oh my goodness, I'm in trouble. The first thing is going to be food, and then it's going to be don't go to work. Be don't do the things that are going to help you feel like you spent the day well.
Mm,
Instead, scroll through things and just
mm,
mindlessly look at other people's lives.
sure.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm with you on the food. Food is a very pleasurable activity, and I really enjoy food. But if you just allow your impulses and your desires to take hold and not be the one, not allowing your witness, if you will, be the one who's making the decisions, and instead just be led around by all of these desires and impulses. You're not going to
Oh
have
yeah,
much fulfillment
yeah.
anywhere near as much.
I I had have was invited into our county jail here, and it's quite large.
That's a good
And
way to. That's a really nice euphemism for getting arrested. I've
yeah,
never
no,
heard that one before.
I
That's
wasn't.
new.
I
Yeah,
have I
that's,
have a blue card. I can get in any door that I want to. Um, but I was invited in to attempt to help guys with fresh hope in how can some of these things be taught within for those who are incarcerated. And one of the things that I think we underestimate, especially in the male population, is how trauma changes our brains.
mhm.
And, trauma is easily defined as anything that is your brain can't handle. You know, something happens, and if you're little, it may seem like something simple, but especially with ongoing trauma. I think sometimes there's people who can't live well, or they can't figure out why. But if you go back into their lives and you find out, oh, well, this happened and that happened, or if somebody doesn't understand what their emotional age is, the fact that we have an emotional age, and it's not necessarily the same as our chronological age. And the guys in jail always they're always nervous about taking this self-evaluative thing that basically tells you, based upon the information you give it, as to what age you are emotionally. And that leads into, if you're emotionally maybe have the emotional level of somebody that would be in adolescence, well, that's why you don't have an emotional regulation for life, you know.
Yeah.
And
It's
emotional regulation is so important. In fact, EQ, which is your ability to regulate your emotions, um, people can have extremely high IQs, but if they have average to below average EQ, they won't do very well in life. And people that have average IQs but high EQs can do extremely well in life.
Hmm.
You know,
we we got to be with others. We gotta work well with others. Ian, what's your definition of trauma? I really like that one, Brad. I know Ian has a certain definition of trauma too.
So for me, what I consider trauma is anything from the past that you carry with you. So
Mm-hmm.
any experience that you had that still comes up, whether it comes up in memory or it's activated when certain things happen, and it can be, I've heard the big T, little T. I don't really, I try not to put a classification or a size on it, but because it doesn't really matter how big it was. If you're still carrying it and it's still affecting you today, then there's something that needs to be worked through. There's
yeah,
something there that needs to be healed and acknowledged, and you need to make peace with it in some way so you can allow it to go. But yeah, anything that you're carrying is what I consider trauma.
right. It would be, to me, what it means to carry it would be that if I talk about it and bring it up, that emotion, it evokes emotions or feelings within me,
Hmm.
because that it's still happening to me,
Hmm.
or it still has power. I think we can tell our stories that were traumatic, but if they don't do anything to us, they're nothing more than historical, you know, this happened.
Yeah.
And it was difficult, but it doesn't have any power over me today.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I have that's a good definition too.
Yeah. I like both yours. They both, because it's probably carried with you because it overwhelmed you at some point, and it all ties into earlier this idea about voluntary and involuntary. When we think about traumas, we normally think about involuntary things that were forced upon us unequivocally, and we overwhelmed us. So it makes sense how that would create, kind of a pathway, and maybe even closer to that victimhood mentality. Once we have been, definitionally, technically a victim of something, if that mind is allowed to ruminate, if those thoughts and that negativity bias are allowed to take off, it makes sense that those black brambles around the brain would be able to create that story, that really captivating story of victimhood. And so, Pastor Brad, with whether it's with prisoners or just anyone you work with in your ministries, how do you address that victimhood mentality?
Well, yeah. To me, if I look at, again, it goes back to even if something happened to me and was done to me, yeah, you're technically a victim, right? If somebody commits a crime or whatever, but then I think there's that fight back that people have to have that. You may have done this to me, but this is not going to define me. This is not going to be what my story writes. This is just another chapter in the book. Now, the next chapter is going to be about me overcoming it. The next chapter is going to be about me never being a victim. You can't continue to victimize me by holding power over me through memories or whatever. And, before Ian mentioned the word trigger, the word pain, I think you said something about it's a bit of a trigger for me or whatever. I think even what we get triggered by in life, we have to look at and say, okay, it's an area I need to work on that, or I need to think about this, or I need to process this. To me, there are a lot, I could tell you, there are a lot of people who have mental health diagnoses that are told, you're going to have this the rest of your life. You got to take medicine, blah, blah, blah. And, doctors don't necessarily mean to do what they're doing, but sometimes that's like this curse, and now I'm less than, I'm never going to,
Yeah, it's programming a mindset. You're programming them to think that this is forever, and they have the white coat and the authority, and so okay, well, I guess this is the way that it is. They're the expert, yeah.
And that's when I say to people, well, that's nonsense. You can live well in spite of it. And it's in spite of that we really teach people the thinking of, I can have a great life in spite of. And so in spite of maybe this happening, having been a victim of something, that doesn't make me a victim permanently, nor does it even make me a victim the next day of that. Now, granted, there's a process. I got to let the pain out. I got to work through it. I got to process it. I don't think it's good. And men are, again, really good. Of course, how can we speak of it any other way than from a man's perspective, since we don't have the perspective of, but I don't know about you guys, but more times than not, I think I don't need to work through that. I just need to move on, Well, just moving on with a lot of things doesn't work.
It's an illusion. You're not actually moving on. You're not going to just magically erase that experience.
Yeah, you're just stuffing it somewhere.
Yeah,
and
it's going to fester. Give it time.
I always say, and I don't know if you guys allow this word on your podcast, but if you don't deal with your shit will deal with you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So you got to deal with your stuff, or it's going to deal with you. You got to process it, and processing, it's very simple. It's just talking about it, so it no longer holds power over you. So it doesn't evoke feelings, that it doesn't evoke emotion. And to me, that's how we help people get past being victims.
Yeah, you talked about with groups, like just having more sight on it, more people hear the thing that you're thinking. I think externalizing it, journaling, even so you can see it in a different light, especially talking, sharing, huge, huge for just, it not feeling so overwhelming and overpowering.
Yeah, and knowing that you're not the only one who feels this way or has dealt with it, that it's normal, that, this is it's okay. And the more you tell about a traumatic experience that you've been through, the less traumatic it is. And part of what holds a lot of people back that are in the military is because of what they've seen or what they've experienced, they think that the average person, it's too much, or the average person that hasn't had that experience might think poorly of them, based upon
Mhm.
it. And so it limits who they talk to about it, if they even talk about it. And I think, the more we incorporate our lives to say our lives are this continuing story of things, and I could talk about any one part of it, the more integrated we become, the more authentic and the easier it is to be who we're intended to be, you know. Um, I like who I am today. But I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't gone through the difficulties I've been through. And I'm sure there's more difficulties to come. Until I take my last breath, there's going to be challenges, opportunities to grow, and we become better.
Yeah. Something I wanted to touch on earlier, you were talking about victimhood, and something that we teach our clients is no, really, maybe 1% of scenarios might be an exception to this, but the vast majority of your experiences, even ones where you may have told yourself the story of having been a victim, if you really look into all of the things that led up, all the decisions that were made, all of the choices that you made leading up to this experience that you considered yourself to be a victim of, you can find small areas where you did co-create or at least contribute to the environment that created this experience that you felt like you were a victim of. And it can be really difficult when you felt for a long time, you've told yourself this story over and over, that this thing had been perpetrated against you. You were completely innocent, and it was all this other person. It was all them, and they're bad and you were good, and there was nothing you could have done. It can be really difficult to start peeling away those layers, but if you look really deeply, you can see where you co-created or at least contributed to the experience that you had in some ways. And when you do that, you see how, okay, I did have some control. I wasn't out there. I didn't have, it wasn't true that I didn't have any control over my experience, because that's helplessness. That means there's nothing you could have done. If you had no control at all and it was all perpetrated on you, then yeah, I mean that of course that would be very debilitating. But when you start to see the things that you did to contribute to or co-create that experience, you realize that you did have power and that you did have some control. And the more that you hyper focus on, or maybe not hyper focus, but the more that you look at the micro, the individual choices that you make, the individual words that you choose to use, the environments that you choose to put yourself into, you see how you are creating your reality. You are creating your experience, which means that if you make more intentional choices, you can put yourself in more ideal situations, more ideal environments, which are going to help you create what you want rather than more experiences that you don't want.
1%. Even if you take that and say, okay, there are times where it is just perpetrated upon you, you have nothing, okay, you may have been a victim when it happened, but you're not a victim after it's over,
Hmm.
unless you keep playing the thing over and over and letting it victimize you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we have to catch ourselves. That's where we have to say, um, I'm not I'm not well versed in this, but I'm really starting to delve into this whole idea that emotion is the thing that it's the immediate reaction we have to something, and there aren't too many there's just core emotions that we have, and many of the things we think are one thing really are rooted in fear. Okay, but it's how you interpret the situation, it's how you look at it that brings feelings into it.
Hmm.
So if let's say I am victimized, I've got raw emotion, I'm afraid, I'm fearful. Once it's over, it's over. It's not happening again.
Hmm.
So therefore I need to process what I felt, view it in my life situation, and not give that story the the power of feelings. And if you could catch it early enough, I think you can work through it. That's not to say it's easy, but I think you can work through it. And I, I, I just think there's a lot to be said about understanding the difference between emotions and feelings, because the feelings are what linger and brings back that emotion constantly. But if you're not telling yourself that story, and you're not allowing that story to hold you by those feelings or even the first initial emotion that you've had, there's great power in that because you're letting go. You're releasing it.
Sure. Brad, are you familiar with non-attachment?
Uh, a little, very little, but yeah. Hmm.
I'm hearing a little bit of some subtle undertones of not the idea of non-attachment, especially with these experiences and being attached to these feelings, being attached to being a victim, these titles, these diagnoses, being attached to those things, keeping you stuck, whereas being not
Oh
attached
yeah,
allows you to be a little more free.
yeah. It's for instance, I have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but I make a lot of distinctions. I am not bipolar. I have bipolar disorder. There's a big difference there, because there's a lot more to me than bipolar disorder. Secondly, I'm not going to die from it. I'm going to die with it. I'm not going to die from it. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, there's a lie we believe, and that lie is that life should be easier than it is.
Mm.
You know, I've seen a lot of people act like whatever they've gone through is the worst thing that could have ever happened to somebody. And as a pastor in 40 years of ministry, I can tell them, no, that's not the worst thing. I can pile up a whole bunch of other things, and this could have happened, and that could have happened, and this. Just take it for what it is, and then work through it. Get
Hmm.
on with it. You know, I think sometimes we end up, and this is kind of tough talk, I suppose, but sometimes I think we end up in going through hell, and we just sit down and have a boo-hoo session and end up staying there. And then everybody walking by us or anybody we can tell, we tell our boo-hoo situation to. Well, that's only going to feed the ruminating. That's
Hmm.
only going to feed that thinking about it over and over and over and over and over and over. And pretty soon that's what your brain does.
Right.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
being attached to that identity, I am this versus I had this experience.
hmm,
That's right.
yeah,
Non-attachment is such a good segue for the thing I really want to talk about the most here. I appreciate that segue, Ian and Pastor Brad. This is really top of my mind here. I don't have a question. I'm gonna shoot a lot of stuff at you guys and hear what you think. But just what you were talking about there with this idea that we have this story or this thought that life should be easier than it is. In Buddhism, where they talk a lot about non-attachment, one of the things Buddha is quoted to say, though it's debatable, and the Buddhist scholars will talk to you about nuances on nuances with it, but you hear this thing from Buddhism: life is suffering. It sounds all tough talk and negative, but it's very similar to what you're saying. They're saying there is suffering. The more we try to deny that, all right. But the thing I want to really get your view on is this concept of hope. And I'm going to kind of play a little devil's advocate about what if hope's not a good thing? And in this view, really it starts with this non-attachment. When you have hope, I really liked your definition. It was like seeing the next step. That's good. But we often think about hope more as we're hoping for a certain outcome. I hope that everyone's okay. And then hoping in that sense develops attachment. We become attached to whatever the thing is, and then we're maybe more crestfallen, more destroyed if that is not exactly how we hoped. So you hear a few things around this, and in England there's apparently a saying, it's the hope that kills you. It's the hope that kills you. England, I feel like they're known, the British are a little more known for their darker kind of wry humor, and so it's very British. In Buddhism, one of my teachers is known for saying, be hopeless. Give up hope. And in that sense, they're not talking in a nihilistic way, but in a non-attachment way. They're saying hope for nothing, good or bad, happy or sad. Just be with everything as it is, not attached. And that's the path to, at least a path, toward enlightenment, toward the end of suffering, as some Buddhists might say. So I want to hear your thoughts on this idea of hope, and and these counterpoints to hope.
Well, I would have to say this. Words have so many different definitions. People's perceptions about what something means. And there is a cheap version of hope that is nothing more than a wish. And it's wishful thinking. And what people do is attach, like you said. For instance, this flooding that happened in Texas, it's horrible. And as a parent, you could say, I hope my child is alive. I hope my child is alive. And that's the kind of hope that could kill you, because if they're not, then that even deepens the feelings of hopelessness even deeper. I mean, the reality is that real hope is the kind of hope that says, no matter what, there will be a step forward, a way through it. That's different than saying, I hope this happens, or I hope that's cheap. I mean, it's
narrow and broad is what I'm hearing there.
It's
really narrow definition of hopes versus overall hope.
Yeah, and this goes back to the original sin of mankind. Satan said to Eve and Adam, if you eat this, you will be like God. And that's at the core of our brokenness, that I actually think that I know how things should turn out right. And that means I have all these wishful thinking hopes that are rooted in that brokenness, And instead, the hope that I have is it's the hope that no matter what, I'm going to make it through this. There's going to be steps. It may not be what I want. It may not, that hope is not an issue of what I want. Hope is the issue of knowing that whatever happens, I will go through, and I will have steps that I can take. Now, for me as a Christian, I go back to the Romans 8:28, and when you infuse that kind of hope with faith, now you have sure and certain hope. And it's the kind of thing that says, I know that God's going to take this and make it work for my good. I don't like it. I don't want it. I don't really want to go through it, but I'm going to go through it. and I'm going to take it one step at a time, and I'm going to know what those steps are, and it's going to be okay. I liken it to this. I live in Nebraska. You guys might know that. Um, I live in Omaha. If you follow college football or know any of the history, Nebraska had years and years ago, we were number one more times than not when I was young and life was good. It was like we just enjoyed football, right? So now we've gone through how many coaches, trying to get coaches, trying to, and we always say every year, we're going to be number one. This is the coach. This is the one. And we have high hopes, right? Hope, 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 hope. It's nothing more than wishful thinking because so far it hasn't mattered. Okay. Now, if I end up knowing how a football game plays out and we win, I will watch that game differently than if I don't know the outcome. So as a Christian, if I know the outcome, which Romans 8:28 tells me the outcome, you're going to win. Okay. Now I'm going to go through the difficulties differently than I do if I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I don't have to hope that cheesy hope or that hope that's rooted in what I want, but instead to be able to say, I know there'll be steps. There will be a way forward, no matter what happens. And, otherwise, all you have is wishful thinking. And I think most faith communities have a way of plugging that in to what their belief system is. I really do. I was in a meeting in Washington, D.C. a number of years ago. The White House called about 9 of us together and said, talk to us about how you work with people with a faith community and mental health. And because they know that there's such, and this was prior to the pandemic, so they knew then that there was such a huge need that there's not enough therapists, not enough doctors, not enough counselors to help people through the emotional stuff they're going through, that they need to involve the faith community. Yet the faith community doesn't trust the therapeutic community, and the therapeutic community doesn't trust the faith community. And they were saying, tell us how it works. And I was sitting next to a psychiatrist who teaches at, I think it was Michigan University, or is someplace in Michigan, teaches in med school. And she was a Muslim. And I said, so what I've just said about hope, does it work with your faith? And she said, absolutely. So, to me, hope, understanding that there's a way to have hope that says it's not about the circumstances. It's about that in the circumstances, I will know what the next steps forward are.
Yeah. Thank you. That relationship between hope and faith is really interesting. I think we could have a whole separate podcast on just that. But what I'm hearing there is that faith in something is very helpful for this all-encompassing hope, this idea that there will be a next step, whether that's faith in a certain system, a certain power, or faith in yourself, faith in your resilience, faith in something, something to draw some some strength and stability from. Really helps with that all-encompassing hope. And again, that's a mental model, a mindset that you can build. That doesn't have to be instilled in you. It can truly, you can choose it and build it and grow it. That's fantastic. Well, I just want to be mindful of time here. Ending on a hopeful note is never a bad thing. But Ian, anything you want to make sure that we hit? And of course, Pastor Brad, anything that you want to say to end us?
Yeah, I mean, I like where we're going, or where we were going with the hope, and the examples that were given of, like you were saying, cheap hope, it sounds more like when people using a word to mean what it doesn't actually mean, right?
Exactly.
I hope this turns out this way. Really, you're saying I want it to turn out this way. It's
Yeah.
you're really speaking to what you're wanting, and just another always loving to plug Dr. Betty Martin whenever I can. But it's good to want. It's good to want. It's great. Want all the things. That's okay. But being attached to the want or having big feelings about not getting what you want is where you can kind of get yourself in some hot water. But
Exactly.
it's good to want. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to want things to be a certain way, or to want the world to look a certain way, or to want someone you love to change or heal, or whatever. But if you're so tightly clinging to that happening, that outcome, and then you don't get the outcome that you want, and now you're upset, like that's not it's not good to do that. It's good to want, it's
Right.
not good to be attached to the outcome. And
Yeah.
so hope, the definition that you're giving, I think it is very aligned with what I would look at, or how I would define hope as well, is that there will be another day, that life will go on. All things are temporary, and this moment, just like the last moment and the one before that, it will pass, and you will have new moments to live, and what you do in those new moments is totally in your control. And no one's going to decide what happens in those moments. Maybe what happens, but no one's going to decide how you show up in those moments, how you choose to perceive those moments, and how you
Right.
respond to those moments. That's always within your control. That's the free will that we talk about. That's fully up to you. You get to dictate that. The circumstances, the path and the river, you may not get to determine the rocks and the trees, but you get to determine how you move around them. Or how you approach them. And so I like that distinguishing conversation around hope versus want, and what we're really talking about here.
And I would say how you're defining want is, I would say those are the prayers. You take your wants to the Lord and you say, this is what I'd like. This is what I want. But it has to be followed up with saying, but if you see fit
Right. If it's
to
meant
do it
for you.
other
Right.
than that, I will accept it, and I will have this radical acceptance of it. It is
Sure.
what it is,
Right.
and I will walk through it.
Sure.
We what is, there's a saying, I'm not going to know it off the top of my head, but it's something about so much pain or so much frustration of life, and the angst of life is what we thought we would have versus what is.
Mm-hmm.
And just the fact that learning to let go of thinking that we can dictate how life is going to go, and rolling with it, and just saying, okay, I submit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to hold on to this. I find that then you can almost create a future that is more in line with your dream.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So.
Oh, there's the pup. The pup's ready. The pup knows what time it is.
That's right.
Derek, do you want to take us out?
I guess so. Well, first, Pastor Brad, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Where can people find you? People interested now that this is all over the world. Who knows who will listen to this? Where should people look to find more about Fresh Hope?
They simply go to freshhope.us, and they can see there everything we've got. And, we have a podcast and all that kind of stuff. And then you could email me at pastorbrad@freshhope.us.
Fantastic. We'll get those in the show notes. And I love this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Listeners, please check out Fresh Hope. Check out those show notes for more information. And as always, send us your questions. Send questions for Pastor Brad. Be happy to get him back on to answer your questions. And don't forget to like, subscribe, follow. Help this message get out to more people.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much for being
Been a
here.
pleasure.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
This has been the Do You Feel Heard podcast. If you're interested in resources that will help you move through conflict, you can go to doyoufeelheard.com, where we have tools for individuals and couples.